The portrait watched him from across the study oil paint, rendering Victoria's smile with a permanence that mocked the impermanence of everything else. Damien Sinclair stood at the window, bourbon in hand, though he'd lost the ability to enjoy its burn 2 centuries ago, watching rain streak the glass. Seattle's perpetual gray suited him. 400 years of walking the earth, and he'd never found a city that understood melancholy quite like this one. The clock struck 2. He didn't need to look. Time had become a rhythm in his bones, each second measured against the weight of all the seconds that came before. 10 years since Victoria died. 3,650 days. He'd counted every one. The bourbon went down smooth, wasted on a palate that registered temperature and texture, but no longer pleasure. Damien set the glass on his desk beside the baby shoe, small leather still holding the curve of Gabriel's foot from a decade ago. He kept it in a drawer for years, unable to look at it, unable to throw it away. Recently, he'd taken to leaving it out, a talisman against forgetting that he was more than just king. The study door remained closed. Beyond it, the castle, not the fairy tale kind, but the real stone and mortar fortress, built into the Cascade Mountains, hidden from satellite surveillance by technology, and older magic settled into its nightly rhythms. Vampires didn't sleep, but they understood the value of stillness, of pretending the world operated on human schedules. It made the transition easier when they had to walk among the living. Damien crossed to the portrait, studying the brushstrokes that captured Victoria's cheekbones, the warmth in her brown eyes that had first arrested him in an emergency room 15 years ago. He'd been saving Gabriel, yes, even then. When the boy was barely 5, there had been threats, and she'd been the nurse who didn't flinch when his wound knitted itself shut faster than human tissue should. She'd simply met his eyes, handed him a clean shirt, and whispered 2 words that changed his existence. I know. Most humans who learned the truth either worshipped or ran. Victoria had done neither. She'd gone home, researched everything she could find on vampires, myths, and facts tangled together in the mess of human understanding, and shown up at his door 3 days later with a list of questions and a thermos of coffee. Real coffee, not the pretentious, overpriced stuff, just diner brew strong enough to strip paint. She'd sat across from him and asked about his life as though he were simply a man with an unusual medical condition, rather than a predator who'd walked the earth since the age of sail. He'd fallen in love with her curiosity first. The rest followed like dominoes. Damien's phone vibrated against his hip, an intrusion he almost ignored. Only 3 numbers had access to this line: Drake, his head of security, Vivian, his closest counsel advisor, and Gabriel's personal guard. The screen showed an unknown number. Impossible. The encryption alone should have blocked unauthorized calls, and the deeper wards woven into the phone's circuit board would fry any hacking attempt. He answered with the same tone he'd used for 400 years when someone dared something impossible. State your business. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman, American accent, Pacific Northwest regional markers, suggesting she'd grown up somewhere between Portland and Vancouver. Tired. Not the exhaustion of a missed night's sleep, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been running on fumes so long, she'd forgotten what rest had felt like. Yet underneath the fatigue lay steadiness, the kind nurses and emergency responders developed after seeing enough tragedy to know panic accomplished nothing. The words tumbled out in a rush, professional training warring with civilian confusion. She'd found a boy, unconscious, in an alley behind Pike Place Market. No pulse, but warm. She emphasized that twice medical background, showing through and holding a ring with a phone number engraved inside. Damien's world contracted to a pinpoint. The bourbon glass in his other hand shattered shards embedding in his palm. Blood welled and healed before it could drip. His voice, when it emerged, came from somewhere deeper than his chest, the command of centuries compressed into syllables. Describe him, every detail, now. She rattled off observations maybe 10 years old. Dark hair, unnaturally pale, even for a sick child dressed in what she called weird fancy clothes. Velvet waistcoat, actual silver buttons, handmade trousers that looked like they belonged in a period drama. Damien's free hand found the edge of his desk wood grain, pressing patterns into his palm as he forced himself to remain still. His eyes. What color are his eyes? A pause, confusion bleeding through the line. They were closed. He was unconscious. Didn't he understand that the command left no room for argument, centuries of absolute authority compressed into 3 words? Open them. He heard her breath catch, heard fabric rustle. As she maneuvered the boy's face toward whatever light the alley offered at, he glanced at the clock, 11:43 at night. Then a sharp intake of breath, the sound people made when confronted with something that shouldn't exist. Her description confirmed what he already knew. Amber irises shot through with gold that moved like embers in a dying fire. Gabriel had inherited Victoria's warm brown eyes, but Damien's luminescence, the genetic marker that appeared in every member of the Sinclair bloodline for the past 600 years. Damien found himself standing, though he couldn't remember rising. The silence stretched between them, a gulf filled with implications he wasn't ready to process. Finally, he forced his voice to steady. Your name. Not a question, a demand. She hesitated, smart woman recognizing power when she heard it, then answered, Sarah Mitchell. Mitchell. The name detonated in his mind like a silver grenade. Victoria's maiden name, Grace's surname. The family that had produced the woman he loved and the woman who killed her, both bound by blood and separated by choices that ended in tragedy. But Grace was dead, had been dead for 19 years. He'd verified it himself after Victoria passed, making certain her sister found peace, even if she'd denied his wife the same. Unless Grace had left something behind. Someone. Damien's mind raced through possibilities while his mouth continued the interrogation. Sarah Mitchell insisted the boy needed a hospital civilian instinct, overriding whatever danger sense should have warned her not to involve herself. He cut through her protests with surgical precision. Stay exactly where you are. Touch nothing. Let no one approach him. Do not call anyone else. We are coming. She tried to ask who we were. He ended the call. The next 3 minutes blurred into action. Damien hit Drake's emergency line, relaying Gabriel's location and the impossible detail about the woman who'd found him. Drake's response came clipped and professional, but Damien heard the undercurrent of shock. Mitchell, after all these years. Drake had been there when Grace fled, had watched Damien honor Victoria's dying wish to let her sister live, despite the poison that had killed the woman they both loved. Damien grabbed his coat, unnecessary for warmth, but humans expected it, and was halfway to the garage when Vivian intercepted him in the corridor. She moved with a liquid grace of her 250 years silver hair pulled into an elegant knot, violet eyes sharp with the intelligence that had kept her alive through 3 different vampire regimes. Sire Drake informed me, you can't go personally. If this is a trap, he kept walking. She matched his pace, shorter legs compensating with the preternatural speed they all possessed. Then it's a trap I'm walking into. He's my son, Vivian. Which is exactly why Kane and his faction would use him as bait. Let Drake handle the retrieval. You're needed here to manage the council. They're already questioning your fitness to rule. If you abandon your post for... Damien stopped so abruptly she overshot by 3 steps. When he turned, something in his expression made even Vivian, who'd stared down challengers twice her size, take an involuntary step back. Let me be perfectly clear. I am going to retrieve my son. While I'm gone, you will hold the council in check. If anyone moves against me, you have my authorization to respond with extreme prejudice. Is that understood? Vivian studied him for a long moment, then dipped her head in acknowledgement. As he turned to leave, her voice followed him down the corridor. For what it's worth, I think you're right to go. A king who won't fight for his own isn't worth following. The garage held 15 vehicles, all electric, to minimize the noise that might draw human attention, all black, to blend with Seattle's perpetual twilight. Damien slid into the Tesla Model S, Drake already waiting in the passenger seat. 2 additional vehicles idled behind them, medical team and security detail prepared for whatever they might find. Drake handed him a tablet displaying satellite feeds of Post Alley. Thermal imaging showed 1 human heat signature, Sarah Mitchell presumably kneeling beside a cooler spot that barely registered. Gabriel. Damien's jaw tightened. His son's body temperature had dropped below normal, a sign of severe trauma in vampires. Whatever had happened, Gabriel had burned through his energy reserves trying to heal and failed. 3 hours ago, Drake began, voice steady despite the implications. Gabriel asked his guard for permission to visit the garden. Standard request. The guard agreed, maintained visual contact for the first 20 minutes. Then Gabriel said he needed to use the restroom and went inside the east wing. Never came out. How is that possible? The ward should have alerted us the moment he left the grounds. Drake's silence was answer enough. Someone had disabled the wards. From the inside. A betrayal that narrowed the suspect list to fewer than a dozen vampires with the knowledge and access required. The drive from the Cascade Mountains to downtown Seattle should have taken 90 minutes. Drake navigated the dimensional folds woven into certain roads, old magic predating the city itself, paths the indigenous peoples had used long before white settlers arrived and paved over everything. The Tesla slipped through reality's seams, emerging in an alley system that connected to Pike Place Market without ever touching the main streets. Damien watched the city scroll past through windows tinted dark enough to prevent accidental sunburn. Seattle at night belonged to the desperate, in the damned, the homeless huddling under highway overpasses, and the addicts searching for their next fix in Pioneer Square's shadowed doorways. He'd lived here for 30 years, long enough to watch the tech boom transform neighborhoods from working-class grit into sterile condos that priced out everyone who'd built the city's character. Victoria had hated the changes. She'd grown up in a Seattle that still remembered its fishing village roots before Amazon turned South Lake Union into a corporate campus and Google bought up half of Fremont. Post Alley appeared in the windshield, narrow and slick with rain. The medical van pulled up first, blocking the entrance, while Damien's vehicle rolled silently to a stop 3 feet from where a woman knelt in a puddle, her jacket draped over a small figure propped against the brick wall. Damien stepped out into the rain that immediately soaked his shoulders. He barely noticed. His entire focus had narrowed to the boy, to Gabriel, pale and still, in a way that triggered every protective instinct 400 years of fatherhood had ingrained. He crossed the distance in 3 strides that looked human normal, but covered the ground faster than strictly possible, dropping to one knee beside his son. Gabriel's chest rose and fell in shallow movements. Alive. The relief hit like a physical blow. Loosening tension Damien hadn't realized had locked every muscle in his body. He reached out with hands that wanted to shake, tilting Gabriel's face into the light. The burns on his neck told the story, silver enchanted, applied with precision to cause maximum pain while avoiding lethal damage. This wasn't an assassination attempt. It was a message. I put my jacket over him. He seemed cold. Damien looked up. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, watched him with eyes that held concern rather than fear. She'd risen when he arrived, but hadn't retreated, remaining close enough to intervene if she judged it necessary. Protective instinct over a stranger's child. Interesting. She looked older than her voice suggested, early 30s rather than 20s, with the kind of face that revealed its attractiveness slowly rather than stunning at first glance. Dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail, minimal makeup that had smeared in the rain clothes that spoke of utility over fashion. The jacket she'd given Gabriel bore patches on the sleeves, Swedish Medical Center Emergency Medical Services. Former EMT, current medical professional. That explained the steadiness, the clinical assessment, the immediate call rather than panic. Damien returned his attention to Gabriel, fingers gentle against his son's throat, checking the pulse he knew would be faint. The medical team arrived with their pod, a piece of technology that looked like a stretcher, but functioned as a mobile intensive care unit. They moved with the efficiency of people who drilled this scenario 100 times, sliding Gabriel onto the platform and initiating scans that would tell Damien everything about his son's condition in the next 60 seconds. "You called me." He directed the words at Sarah without looking away from Gabriel. "The ring had my number. How did you know to call?" "I didn't know anything. Kid was dying, ring was clearly important, seemed worth a shot. Simple, direct, the truth or close enough to it that Damien's centuries of reading people detected no deception. She'd acted on instinct and training, the kind of split-second decision-making that separated competent medical personnel from the merely adequate. How did you touch the crest without burning?" Sarah glanced at her palm, flexing her fingers as though checking for injuries she might have missed. "I didn't know I shouldn't." Drake approached, tablet in hand, camera discreetly photographing the scene. He'd catalog every detail, the exact position of Gabriel's body, the pattern of rain on the pavement, the trajectory Sarah would have taken approaching from the street. Later, forensics would reconstruct the timeline, searching for clues about who dumped Gabriel here and why. Damien stood addressing Sarah directly for the first time. "You found Prince Gabriel alive. That's all that matters. But you contacted me directly using a number that shouldn't exist on any device accessible to civilians. That raises questions. Prince, the word came out, flat disbelief, warring with the evidence before her eyes. Prince of what? Not a conversation for a public alley. You'll need to come with us. Sarah's expression shifted, wariness replacing concern. Smart woman recognizing the transition from grateful parent to something more complicated. I appreciate you taking care of the kid, but I've got work in 6 hours and... Miss Mitchell. Damien let a fraction of his real authority leak through the weight of 4 centuries and 200 years as king. Someone used an extinct weapon to torture my son and left him to die in an alley. You're the only witness. You're also impossibly a member of a bloodline I thought ended 19 years ago. Until I understand how and why you're here, you're either the luckiest woman in Seattle or the most dangerous. Either way, you're coming with me. He watched her process the implicit threat, saw the moment she calculated her chances of refusing, and found them wanting. To her credit, she didn't crumble. Her spine-straightened chin lifting in defiance, even as she acknowledged the reality of her situation. Fine, but I'm riding with the kid. Someone needs to monitor his vitals. Drake started to object. Damien raised a hand, cutting him off. Agreed. Drake, she rides in the medical van. Keep her in visual range, but don't restrain her. She's not a prisoner. Yet. The word hung unspoken between them. The convoy formed quickly, medical van in the lead with Sarah installed in the jump seat beside Gabriel's pod, Damien's vehicle following close enough to maintain line of sight. Drake handled communications, coordinating with Castle Security to prepare a private medical suite in a secure guest room. Damien watched through the windshield as Sarah leaned over Gabriel, checking the monitors with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from years of emergency medicine. She'd peeled off her wet outer layer, revealing scrubs underneath. End of a shift, probably taking the alley shortcut home because it saved 3 blocks and her feet hurt. Background check is running, Drake said, eyes on his tablet. Preliminary results show Sarah Mitchell, age 32, current employment at Swedish Medical Center in administrative capacity. Previous employment as EMT for King County until 2 years ago. Before that, various medical positions stretching back through her 20s. Family. Father deceased 3 years ago, heart attack. Mother deceased when subject was 5, listed as vehicular accident. No siblings, no children. Divorce finalized 18 months ago. No fault separation, minimal assets divided. Clean credit, no criminal record, no red flags except... Drake paused, scrolling through data. She's had 14 different addresses in the past 27 years. Never stays anywhere longer than 2 years, usually less. Classic flight pattern. Grace had run for 19 years before the hunters caught up with her. Had she taught her daughter to run too? Damien stared at the van ahead at the woman who'd saved his son without knowing the cost of her kindness. The name Mitchell appears in our archives exactly twice, Drake continued. Victoria Sinclair, née Mitchell, and her sister Grace Mitchell, both listed as deceased. Grace's file has a notation in your handwriting. Died in Portland, vehicular homicide, staged to look like drunk driving, accident, hunters confirmed responsible. Dated 19 years ago. I attended her funeral, Damien said quietly. Made certain she was buried properly, that her death was investigated. The police found nothing. The hunters were careful. Then how does Sarah exist if Grace died when Sarah was 5? Grace ran, changed her name, moved constantly, taught her daughter to do the same. Sarah probably doesn't even know why. Just learned to pack light and never put down roots because mom said so. And you trust your mother's paranoia when you're too young to question it. Drake absorbed this, fingers moving across the tablet. I'll have a full genealogy by the time we reach the castle. DNA comparison against Victoria's samples should confirm bloodline. Damien nodded, attention drifting to the Seattle skyline visible between buildings. Somewhere in this city, someone had obtained enchanted silver, disabled his castle's wards, and dumped his son in an alley with Victoria's niece close enough to find him. Coincidence was a luxury he couldn't afford. Pull the security footage from the last 6 hours. I want to know who accessed the ward controls and when. Cross-reference with council members' movements. If someone inside helped, already started, First pass suggests General Kane left the castle 3 hours before Gabriel disappeared. Officially, he was conducting patrol inspections. His route took him through the dimensional folds towards Seattle. Kane. Damien's hands tightened on his knees. 200 years of loyal service rising through the ranks from foot soldier to the council's youngest general in a century. But lately, Kane had grown vocal about his concerns regarding Damien's leadership, questioning decisions in council meetings, gathering support among the old guard, who remembered the days when vampire kings ruled through fear rather than law. The dimensional roads smoothed the journey reality folding around them until the city gave way to forest, to mountains to the hidden valley where Damien's castle had stood for 3 centuries. Originally built by a vampire clan that predated his reign, the structure combined medieval European architecture with modern retrofitting. Solar panels disguised as slate roofing, geothermal systems hidden beneath the foundation. Security measures that blended cutting-edge technology with magic old enough to predate written language. The convoy rolled through gates that opened without visible mechanism, down a drive lined with Douglas firs into a courtyard and illuminated by torches burning with the blue-white flame of enchanted fire. Vampires materialized from doorways and balconies drawn by the news that Gabriel had been found. Damien caught fragments of conversation whispers that would spread through the castle within minutes. The prince recovered, a human brought inside. The Mitchell name resurrected from the grave. He stepped from the vehicle as the medical team transferred Gabriel's pod to a motorized cart. Sarah emerged from the van, looking around with the kind of wide-eyed assessment that came from processing impossible information while maintaining professional composure. Her gaze caught on the vampires watching from the shadows on the blue fire that couldn't exist according to human physics on the castle, that shouldn't be here according to satellite surveys and topographical maps. To her credit, she didn't scream, didn't run, just squared her shoulders and followed the medical cart as though walking into vampire fortresses was something she did every Tuesday. Damien fell into step beside her. The medical team will stabilize Gabriel. Standard protocol includes blood work, tissue scans, toxicology for silver composition. It will take several hours. In the meantime, you and I need to talk about how I'm supposedly related to vampires, because I'm pretty sure my family tree doesn't include fangs. Your aunt married a vampire. Your mother was human. You're human, but genetics aren't the issue. Access is. That ring Gabriel was holding, it's been in my family for 600 years. The crest is enchanted to burn anyone who touches it without Sinclair bloodline. You held it long enough to read the inscription. That shouldn't be possible unless... He stopped. Sarah had frozen 3 steps behind, face draining of color as understanding crashed through her defenses. Unless what? Damien turned to face her fully. Unless Victoria did something before she died. Something that marked you, bound you to this family in ways neither of us understand. Which means either my wife had precognition I didn't know about, or someone's been planning this for a very long time. Sarah's knees buckled. Damien caught her elbow, steadying her with a grip gentle enough not to bruise. She leaned into his support for 3 breaths, then pulled away, straightening with visible effort. I need to sit down, and you need to explain everything, starting with how my mother supposedly killed your wife. The study Damien brought her to occupied the castle's east tower, a circular room with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering views of the forested valley below. Books lined the walls between windows, volumes in languages spanning 4 centuries and 3 continents. A leather sofa faced a stone fireplace where flames danced without consuming logs. Damien gestured Sarah toward the seating while he crossed to a sideboard holding crystal decanters. Bourbon, whiskey, wine. Water. Something tells me I need a clear head for this conversation. He poured filtered water into a glass, added ice from a bucket that somehow stayed frozen despite the fire's warmth, and delivered it to her before settling into the chair opposite. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sarah sipped her water. Damien studied the woman who shared his dead wife's profile, her nose, the angle of her jaw. Genetics expressed themselves in bone structure and mannerisms, the way Sarah tucked her hair behind her ear, mirroring a gesture Victoria had made 1,000 times. Tell me about your mother, he began. What do you remember? Sarah's fingers tightened on the glass. Not much. I was 5 when she died. Car accident, they said. Dad never wanted to talk about it. We moved to Montana right after the funeral, then Colorado, then Arizona. Different state every year or 2 until I turned 18. I thought he couldn't hold a job. Turns out he was running. From what I don't know, he died 3 years ago without explaining. Heart attack at 57. Too young, too sudden. I went through his papers afterward, found newspaper clippings about Mom's accident. The police report didn't match his version. He said she died in Seattle. Reports said Portland. He said it was instant. Reports said she lived long enough to be transported to the hospital, died in surgery. I spent a year trying to find out why he lied. Hit dead ends everywhere. Damien leaned forward, elbows on knees. Your mother's real name was Grace Mitchell. She was Victoria's younger sister by 3 years. They grew up in a family that traced its lineage back to the original vampire hunters of medieval Europe. Not the Hollywood version with crosses and stakes. Real hunters. People who understood vampires were neither demons nor invincible, just a different species with different rules. Sarah set down her glass with deliberate care. You're telling me my family hunted vampires? For 6 generations. Grace was trained from childhood combat weapons, vampire physiology, how to identify nests, how to move between our world and yours without detection. She was good. Probably would have led the family if Victoria hadn't complicated everything by falling in love with the thing Grace had been raised to kill. You. Me. Damien rose, crossing to the window. Rain had started again, drops sliding down glass that was thicker than it appeared, reinforced with the same materials NASA used for spacecraft. I met Victoria 15 years ago. Gabriel, he was younger then, just turning 5, had been targeted by a rival vampire faction. Assassination attempt. I got him to safety but took damage in the process. Victoria was the emergency room nurse who stitched me up. She saw things heal too fast, put together details that should have been impossible. And instead of running or calling authorities, she asked questions. He turned back to Sarah. Your aunt was brilliant, curious, brave to the point of recklessness. She researched vampires the way other people researched rare diseases, tracking down sources separating myth from fact. When she showed up at my door 3 days later, she had a list of questions and zero fear. It was the most refreshing conversation I'd had in a century. And you fell in love. Slowly, then all at once. Victoria saw me, not the king or the predator, just Damien, a man who happened to be immortal and deeply tired of politics. We kept it secret for 2 years. Then Grace found out. Sarah's expression shifted, pieces falling into place. She tried to stop it. She tried to save her sister. From her perspective, Victoria was under the thrall of a monster. Grace believed I'd use vampire powers to seduce Victoria, that eventually I'd drain her dry or turn her into something she wasn't. So Grace did what hunters do. She used enchanted silver. Damien returned to his chair, the memory weighing on him like physical mass. Enchanted silver is different from regular silver. Regular silver burns vampires on contact, causes pain, but heals. Enchanted silver binds to our cellular structure, prevents healing, spreads through the bloodstream like radiation. It's agonizing and in sufficient doses, fatal. The formula was supposedly destroyed 2 centuries ago in a purge. Somehow Grace acquired it. She poisoned Victoria. She tried, mixed it into tea diluted enough that Victoria wouldn't taste the metallic tang. But Victoria was already pregnant, had been for 3 weeks. We were planning to wait until Gabriel was old enough to understand before turning her. The silver bonded with the pregnancy hormones, created a compound that was killing them both. The silence stretched. Sarah's knuckles had gone white around her water glass. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to reverse. Turning her would have killed the baby. Trying to abort would have killed her. The only option was to let the pregnancy continue and hope Victoria's immune system could filter enough silver to keep the baby viable. It did. Barely. Gabriel was born at 38 weeks underweight, but alive. Victoria died 8 minutes later. Sarah's voice, when she found it, was barely above a whisper. Did she know that Grace had... Yes, Victoria figured it out in the 2nd trimester. Grace had already run by then, realized what she'd done and fled. Victoria's last words to me were a request. She made me promise to let Grace go, to not hunt her down, to understand that her sister thought she was protecting her. And you kept that promise. I did. I tracked Grace to confirm she'd reached safety, made sure she had money and documents to start over. Watched from a distance as she built a new life in Portland under a different name. When the hunters caught up with her 19 years ago, I attended her funeral from the back row, verified the investigation, and closed the file. I thought that was the end of the Mitchell line. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Her reflection stared back from the glass, features distorted by rain running down the exterior. My mother killed your wife, and you let her live. I honored Victoria's dying wish. There's a difference. But you knew, all this time you knew, and when those hunters killed Mom, I tried to stop it, arrived 3 hours too late. Grace had gotten careful over the years, changed her patterns, but she'd made one mistake. She'd written down the formula for enchanted silver. Some kind of insurance policy, I think. The hunters wanted it, she refused. They staged the accident to look like she'd been drinking, ran her off the road, took the body and whatever documents she'd been carrying. I searched her apartment afterward, found nothing. Assumed the formula died with her. Sarah pressed her forehead against the glass. Did Dad know about all of this? I don't know. Grace might have told him, might have kept him ignorant for his protection. Either way, he did what he had to do, kept you safe, kept you moving, made sure you learned not to stay anywhere long enough to form patterns. We were running from vampire hunters. All those years I thought he was just paranoid or unstable. Turns out he was saving my life. Damien said nothing. Sometimes the truth needed silence to settle. After a moment, Sarah turned from the window. That ring Gabriel was holding. You said it's been in your family for 600 years. How did it end up in an alley with your son? That's what I intend to find out. The ring normally stays in the royal vault. Only 3 people have access: myself, Drake, and Gabriel's primary guard. It should have triggered alarms if removed without authorization. The fact that it didn't mean someone disabled security from inside an inside job, which narrows suspects to council members and senior staff, people I've trusted for decades or longer. Damien's jaw tightened. Someone in my inner circle is working with hunters or has gone rogue. Either way, they used my son as a message and you as the delivery system. Why me? If they wanted to hurt you, why not just kill Gabriel? Because killing him would be too clean, too simple. He gestured between them. This is psychological warfare. They know about Victoria, know about Grace. Bringing you into the picture forces me to confront my past while destabilizing my present. Gabriel forms attachments. If he bonds with you, if he sees you as family, and then something happens to you, I become leverage. Exactly. And if I'm distracted protecting both of you, I'm vulnerable to challenges from within the council. There are factions who believe I've grown too soft since Victoria's death, too willing to accommodate humans, too hesitant to exercise absolute authority. They want the old ways back, fear and power instead of laws and diplomacy. Sarah returned to the sofa, sinking into the leather with a sigh that seemed to come from her bones. So what happens now to me? Damien considered the question, weighing honesty against tactical advantage. Right now, you're the only witness to Gabriel's abduction. You're also potentially the only person who can access whatever Grace left behind. If she hid the formula somewhere, if there are documents or codes that require family recognition, you need me to find them. I need to understand what we're dealing with. The silver used on Gabriel was freshly forged, which means someone has recreated the formula or found Grace's notes. Either way, it's a threat not just to my family, but to every vampire in North America. Enchanted silver in the wrong hands could decimate our population. Sarah laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Yesterday, my biggest problem was making rent. Now I'm caught in vampire politics and family legacies I didn't know existed. You'll forgive me if I need a minute to process. Take all the time you need. You're not a prisoner, Miss Mitchell. You're free to leave whenever you choose. Drake will arrange transport back to Seattle, provide resources to help you relocate if you're worried about hunter attention. All I ask is that you make an informed decision. Talk to Gabriel when he wakes. Hear what he has to say. Then decide whether this is a fight you want to join. The intercom on Damien's desk chirped. Drake's voice emerged, professional but strained. Sire, medical update. Gabriel's stable but unconscious. Silver levels in his bloodstream are declining as expected, but Dr. Chen wants to keep him sedated for another 6 hours to give his system time to fully purge the toxins. However, a pause. There's been an anomaly. Damien crossed to the desk, pressing the response button. What kind of anomaly? Gabriel's exhibiting REM sleep patterns inconsistent with sedation. Brain activity suggests he's dreaming, and the content is intense. Dr. Chen says he's calling out for someone named Sarah, multiple times. Clear vocalization despite sedatives that should prevent speech. Sarah had risen from the sofa, moving closer. Damien met her gaze, saw his own confusion reflected back. "We're coming down." The medical wing occupied the castle's lowest level, carved into the mountain bedrock, with the kind of precision that suggested both advanced engineering and old magic. Climate-controlled corridors connected treatment rooms, equipped with technology that blurred the line between cutting-edge medical science and vampire-specific modifications. Chen waited outside Gabriel's room, a vampire who'd been turned during the Ming Dynasty and subsequently earned 3 medical degrees over the intervening centuries. She bowed her head in respect as Damien approached. "Majesty, Miss Mitchell. Report. Prince Gabriel is physically stable. Silver has been neutralized and flushed from his system. Burns are healing at normal rate, full recovery, expected within 48 hours. Psychologically, however, we have a complication. His brain activity suggests he's experiencing vivid dreams, and the emotional content is registering as severe distress. He's calling for Miss Mitchell by name, has been for the past 20 minutes. Damien moved to the observation window. Gabriel lay in a bed sized for his small frame monitors, tracking vitals that all read within acceptable parameters. But his face showed strain, eyebrows drawn together, lips moving around, words too quiet to hear through the glass. Has he met Miss Mitchell before tonight? Unknown, but the specificity of his calls suggests familiarity. He's not asking for the woman or the nurse. He's using her name, Sarah, over and over. Sarah stepped up beside Damien, her reflection ghosting over Gabriel's sleeping form. Is this normal for vampire children? Dr. Chen shook her head. Prince Gabriel is unique, half-human, half-vampire, the only known hybrid in existence. His abilities have been developing unpredictably. 6 months ago, he demonstrated precognitive flashes. 3 months ago, he moved objects with his mind. 2 weeks ago, he made the castle's wards vibrate in response to emotional distress. It's possible he's developed some form of psychic sensitivity that connected with Miss Mitchell during the rescue. Or he knew her before, Sarah said quietly. Maybe he's been dreaming about me for a while and recognized me tonight. Damien turned that over. Victoria used to say Gabriel dreamed about her while he was in the womb. She'd feel him kick when she sang certain songs, go still when she was upset. If his psychic abilities manifested that early, they might extend beyond normal perception. You're suggesting he's precognitive, that he somehow knew Sarah would save him. I'm suggesting we don't understand the full scope of his powers. And until we do, we need to be very careful about what connections we sever. Sarah crossed her arms. Meaning you want me to stay until he wakes up. Meaning I'm asking you to consider it. Gabriel has been through trauma. If his subconscious has latched onto you as safe harbor, removing you abruptly could cause psychological damage. Or I could be making it worse. I'm a stranger. He doesn't know me. But he thinks he does, and right now what he thinks matters more than what's objectively true. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. With respect, Majesty, there's one way to test the theory. Allow Miss Mitchell into his room. If proximity calms him, we'll know the connection is real. If it doesn't, we can reassess. Damien looked at Sarah, reading the conflict in her expression. She was exhausted. He could see it in the fine tremors in her hands, the shadows under her eyes, but underneath the fatigue ran a current of something else. Curiosity, maybe even the first threads of connection to a situation she didn't fully understand but couldn't quite walk away from. Your choice, he said. Sarah studied Gabriel through the glass for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. 5 minutes. Then I need actual sleep or I'm going to collapse. Dr. Chen led them into the room, which smelled of antiseptic and the faint metallic tang of vampire blood. Gabriel stirred as they entered, head turning toward the door, though his eyes remained closed. Sarah approached the bed, slowly, unsure of her role. When she reached the railing, she hesitated, then rested her hand near Gabriel's. The effect was immediate. Gabriel's expression smoothed tension draining from his small frame. His hand moved across the sheets, fingers searching until they found Sarah's, and curled around them with surprising strength. The monitors tracking his vitals showed heart rate and respiration dropping into calmer ranges. Sarah, The word escaped on an exhale, barely audible. You came. Sarah's free hand covered her mouth. Damien watched from the foot of the bed, something tightening in his chest that he hadn't felt in 10 years. Gabriel had been born into grief, raised by a father who loved him, but struggled to connect emotionally, surrounded by vampires who respected him as prince, but saw his humanity as weakness. In all that time, Damien had never seen his son reach for someone with this kind of instinctive trust. I'm here, Sarah whispered, her voice thick. You're safe now. Gabriel's eyes opened slowly, amber irises still clouded with sedation, but focusing on Sarah's face with absolute certainty. I knew you'd come. Mom said you would. The room went silent. Damien exchanged glances with Dr. Chen, who looked as confused as he felt. Your mom, Sarah asked gently. Gabriel, your mom. In my dreams, she tells me things, says you're family, that I should trust you. His eyes drifted to Damien. Dad, Sarah's here. She's safe. I knew she was safe. Damien moved to the opposite side of the bed. Son, do you remember what happened? How you got to the alley? Gabriel's face clouded. There was a message. Said someone knew where Mom was. That they'd tell me if I met them. I went to the theater where Mom used to take me before. His voice cracked. But it was a trick. Someone grabbed me, put something on my neck. It hurt. Everything went dark. Did you see who it was? No, but I heard voices. Two people talking. One said to leave me where she would find me. That it had to be her or it wouldn't work. The other one put something in my hand, the ring. Said your father will understand when the time comes. Sarah leaned closer. Did they say anything else about who she was? Gabriel's eyes had started to drift closed again, sedatives pulling him back under. Said you were the key, that everything depended on you making the right choice. His fingers tightened around hers. Don't go, please. I don't feel safe when you're not here. Sarah looked helplessly at Damien. He read the question in her eyes, what am I supposed to do with that, and had no answer that wouldn't make the situation more complicated. Gabriel needed her. The boy who'd barely smiled in 10 years, who'd inherited his mother's warm nature, but had it buried under layers of trauma and isolation, had found someone who made him feel safe. Damien couldn't take that away. Not yet. I'll stay, Sarah said, her voice soft enough that only Gabriel and Damien could hear. For now, until we figure this out. Gabriel's expression relaxed completely, peace settling over features too young to carry the weight they bore. Within seconds, he'd slip back into sleep, this time without distress, hands still holding Sarah's, as though she were an anchor in rough seas. Dr. Chen made a notation on her tablet. I'll have a cot brought in. Miss Mitchell, you should rest. I'll monitor Prince Gabriel overnight and alert you if his condition changes. Sarah shook her head. I'll stay. Just bring me a chair. I've done longer shifts on worse furniture. Damien watched her settle in beside Gabriel's bed, exhaustion and determination fighting for dominance in her expression. This woman who'd stumbled into his world by accident or design, who shared his dead wife's bloodline, and somehow his son's trust, who represented both answers and complications he wasn't prepared to navigate. He should send her away, should arrange transport back to Seattle and let her return to her ordinary life. Should protect her from the political storms gathering around anyone who got too close to his family. But Gabriel's hand held hers, and Damien found himself unable to break that connection. Drake will post guards outside, he said, for your protection and Gabriel's. If you need anything, ask. The staff will accommodate you. Sarah nodded without looking away from Gabriel. He's a good kid. He is. He's also everything I have left of Victoria, which makes him both my greatest strength and my greatest vulnerability. I won't hurt him. I know, but others will, and they'll use you to do it. Damien moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Get some rest, Miss Mitchell. Tomorrow we start finding answers. He left them there, his son and the woman who might be family or weapon or both, and climbed back through the castle to his study. The portrait of Victoria greeted him, oil paint unchanging, while everything else shifted beneath his feet. Damien poured himself another bourbon he didn't want, stared at the woman he'd loved and lost, and tried to make sense of the impossible. Gabriel had dreams about Victoria. Fine. Children dreamed about deceased parents. That was normal grief. But Gabriel had never met Sarah, had no reason to know her name or her face, yet he'd called for her with the certainty of someone who'd known her for years. And he'd said Victoria told him about her, told him Sarah was family, that he should trust her. Damien didn't believe in ghosts. He'd lived 400 years and never encountered convincing evidence of an afterlife. When vampires died, they stayed dead. When humans died, they simply ceased. Victoria was gone. He'd held her as she passed, felt her last breath against his neck, watched the light leave her eyes. There was no version of reality where she was still somehow communicating with her son, unless Gabriel's abilities extended beyond precognition into something else. Psychic projection, genetic memory, some form of consciousness transfer Victoria had managed in her final moments, embedding part of herself into Gabriel in ways that allowed her to persist as more than mere memory. The intercom on his desk chirped, Drake's voice tense with urgency. "Sire, we've completed preliminary analysis of the security footage. You need to see this." Damien set down his glass. "On my way." The security center occupied a reinforced room 3 levels below the main castle walls, lined with monitors displaying feeds from 500 cameras spread across the grounds and dimensional perimeter. Drake stood at the central console, pulling up footage time-stamped 3 hours before Gabriel's disappearance. "Watch." He expanded the feed showing Gabriel's approach to the East Wing bathroom. The boy entered through one door visible through an interior camera for 4 seconds as he crossed the hallway, then exited through another door, except it wasn't Gabriel. Damien leaned closer. The figure that emerged from the bathroom matched Gabriel's height and build, wore the same clothes, moved with similar gait. But something about the movement was wrong. Too smooth, too purposeful. Gabriel walked like a child who'd inherited his father's grace but hadn't grown into it yet. This figure moved like an adult, mimicking a child's mannerisms. "Shapeshifter," Damien said, "or illusion magic. We're running analysis on the thermal signature. Either way, someone swapped places with Prince Gabriel in that hallway." The guard never noticed because he was watching the door, expecting Gabriel to emerge within normal time frame. The fake Gabriel walked back to the garden, maintained position for 90 minutes, then complained of feeling ill and asked to return to his quarters. Guard escorted him inside. Fake Gabriel asked for privacy, went into the bedroom and vanished, while the real Gabriel was being transported to Seattle. Drake nodded grimly. Thermal cameras showed 2 heat signatures departing the castle grounds at the moment Gabriel entered the bathroom. One matches Gabriel's size. The other is adult size, moving with Gabriel's signature in some kind of carry configuration. They used the dimensional road toward the city, which means they had access codes and authorization. That's level 3, clearance minimum. Pull the authorization logs. I want every level 3 access in the last 24 hours cross-referenced with council member movements. Drake's fingers flew across the keyboard. Data scrolled past too fast for human eyes, but perfectly readable to vampires. 3 names appeared in red: General, Kane, Castellan Frost, and Vivian. Damien's jaw tightened. Where was Vivian during Gabriel's disappearance? In the East Library. Multiple witnesses confirmed she was consulting historical records for an upcoming council meeting. She never left that location for the entire 3-hour window. And Castellan, his authorization was used, but thermal records show he was in his quarters the entire time. Either he loaned his credentials or someone stole them. Which leaves Kane, who departed the castle 90 minutes before Gabriel disappeared, returned 4 hours later, and filed a patrol report claiming he had been inspecting dimensional road integrity in the greater Seattle area. Damien stared at Kane's name on the screen. 200 years of service, decorated veteran of 3 territorial wars, member of the council for 80 years, and now possibly the architect of his son's kidnapping. "Bring him in, full security detail. I want him in an interrogation room within the hour." Drake hesitated. "Sire, if we arrest a council member without ironclad proof, the others will see it as paranoia. Kane has support among the old guard. Moving against him could fracture the council. And leaving a traitor in my inner circle could get Gabriel killed. I'll take political instability over my son's death. Bring him in." "Yes, sire." Damien returned to his study, mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. If Kane had orchestrated Gabriel's abduction, the question was why. Power ideology. Kane had been vocal about his opposition to Damien's progressive policies, his belief that vampires should rule through fear rather than law. But kidnapping the heir seemed excessive even for political opposition. Unless Kane didn't intend for Gabriel to survive. Unless this was the opening move in a coup designed to destabilize Damien's rule and seize power in the resulting chaos. The phone in his pocket vibrated. A text from an unknown number, 2 words in all capitals. Check Gabriel. Damien was moving before conscious thought, caught up taking stairs 4 at a time, shouldering through corridors, emerging into the medical wing at a dead run. Dr. Chen met him at Gabriel's door, face pale. What happened? I don't know. One moment he was sleeping peacefully. The next his vitals spiked. Heart rate, blood pressure, neural activity all surging simultaneously. Miss Mitchell is with him now, trying to... Damien pushed past her into the room. Gabriel thrashed in the bed monitor, screaming alerts. Sarah leaning over him, trying to hold his hand while avoiding flailing limbs. The boy's eyes had rolled back, showing only whites, and his skin had taken on a faint luminescence that Damien recognized from his own abilities, manifesting under extreme stress. Gabriel. Damien reached the bed, catching his son's shoulders. Gabriel, I'm here. You're safe. Come back to me. Gabriel's voice emerged in a tone that wasn't quite his own, layered with harmonics that made Damien's hair stand on end. She's here. She's watching. She says we're in danger. All of us. The council is compromised. Trust no one except... His eyes snapped to Sarah. Except family. Then he went limp. Dr. Chen rushed in with a sedative. Damien held Gabriel still while she administered the injection, watching his son's vitals gradually return to normal ranges. Sarah had backed against the wall, hands shaking, face drained of color. What the hell was that? She whispered. I don't know. Damien smoothed Gabriel's hair back from his forehead, a gesture Victoria used to make. But I intend to find out. Dr. Chen finished her examination. No lasting damage. Whatever triggered the episode, it was psychic rather than physical. Prince Gabriel's abilities are evolving faster than we anticipated. He needs monitoring every 4 hours minimum. Do it and increase security. No one enters this room without my explicit authorization. Damien looked at Sarah, saw her processing everything. The impossible, the terrifying, the implications of Gabriel's warning. You should go, get actual sleep in a real bed. I'll have Drake escort you to guest quarters. Sarah pushed off from the wall. No, I told him I'd stay. And if what he just said is true, if the council is compromised, then maybe the only people we can trust are the ones who weren't here before tonight. Which is me. She returned to the chair beside Gabriel's bed. So I'm staying. You can post guards, you can monitor us, you can do whatever makes you feel in control. But I'm not leaving him alone. Something in Damien's chest, long dormant, stirred. Not attraction, not yet, maybe not ever, but recognition. Sarah Mitchell had the same stubborn loyalty Victoria had possessed, the same willingness to stand her ground against impossible odds. Family, Gabriel had said. Maybe he was more right than any of them understood. All right, Damien moved to the door. But you're not staying alone. I'll be right outside. If anything changes, anything at all, you call for me immediately. Sarah nodded, already settling back into her vigil. Damien stepped into the corridor where Drake waited with a security detail. No one gets past this door. Not council members, not staff, not unless I'm with them. Understood. Understood, sire. Drake paused. Kane is waiting in interrogation room 3. He's demanding to know why he was summarily arrested. Let him wait. I want him uncomfortable. Uncertain. People make mistakes when they're off balance. Damien made his way to the interrogation level, a section of the castle most residents pretended didn't exist. The room was Spartan concrete walls, steel table chairs bolted to the floor, cameras recording from 3 angles. Kane sat with the rigid posture of a soldier, 200 years of military discipline, holding him upright despite the restraints binding his wrists to the table. He looked up as Damien entered, copper eyes flashing with barely contained fury. This is outrageous. I've served this court for 2 centuries, and you have me arrested like a common criminal. Damien took the seat across from him, saying nothing, letting the silence build pressure. He'd interrogated hundreds of prisoners over the centuries. The ones who broke fastest were the ones who couldn't handle quiet, who needed to fill the space with justifications and denials. Kane lasted 43 seconds. I know what you think, that I had something to do with Gabriel's abduction. But I was on patrol following authorized routes, conducting legitimate inspections. Check the logs. Check them. I did check the logs. Damien's voice cut through Kane's protestations like a blade. Your authorization codes were used to access the dimensional roads at exactly the moment Gabriel disappeared. Your thermal signature places you in Seattle during the window when my son was being dumped in an alley, and witnesses saw you meeting with unknown contacts in Pioneer Square 2 weeks ago. Kane's jaw tightened. Those contacts were informants, human criminals who sometimes have intel on Hunter movements. I was gathering intelligence for the council without reporting it to me or Drake. Convenient. Because I didn't want to alarm you unnecessarily. The intel was preliminary, unconfirmed. I planned to present it once I had something actionable. Damien leaned forward. Try again, this time with the truth. Kane's expression shifted, calculation replacing indignation. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to the measured tone of someone choosing words carefully. You want truth? Fine. I did meet with contacts. I did gather intelligence. And yes, I was in Seattle tonight, but not for the reason you think. I was tracking the hunters who took Gabriel, trying to intercept them before they could complete their mission. How did you know Gabriel had been taken if you weren't involved in the abduction? Because I've been investigating a conspiracy within this castle for the past 6 months. Someone has been communicating with Hunter cells, providing information about our security protocols, our defensive capabilities. I suspected Castellan. Followed him, documented his meetings, gathered evidence. Tonight I received an anonymous tip that Gabriel was in danger. By the time I reached the city, he'd already been dumped in that alley. Damien studied Kane's face, reading micro-expressions, looking for tells that would reveal deception. But Kane had 200 years of practice controlling his features. If he was lying, he was doing it with expertise. Show me the evidence. In my quarters, encrypted files on a secured server. You'll need my biometrics to access them. Then we'll go retrieve them together. Drake arranged transport. They moved through the castle with a full security detail, drawing stares from vampires who rarely saw council members in restraints. Kane's quarters occupied the North Tower, a suite befitting his ranks but austere in decoration. Military efficiency over comfort, every surface clean and organized. Kane directed them to a wall safe hidden behind a portrait of some long-dead vampire lord. Biometric scan, retinal verification, voice confirmation. The safe opened to reveal a tablet and 3 physical files, each labeled with dates spanning the past 6 months. Damien spread the files across Kane's desk. Photographs of Castellan meeting with humans in locations across Seattle. Transcripts of conversations recorded with parabolic microphones. Financial records showing money transfers from Castellan's accounts to offshore holdings linked to known Hunter organizations. This is extensive. It's a year's worth of work. I couldn't bring it to you until I had definitive proof. Castellan has allies on the council. If I'd moved too soon, they would have closed ranks, destroyed evidence. I needed it airtight. Damien flipped through pages, cross-referencing dates with events. 3 months ago, a minor breach in perimeter security that had seemed random at the time. Castellan had been on duty. 6 weeks ago, a shipment of medical supplies that had gone missing. Castellan had signed off on the delivery. 2 weeks ago, the dimensional road codes had been changed. Castellan had recommended a security update. Why didn't you tell me you suspected him? Kane's expression hardened. Because I suspected you already knew. You and Castellan have been close since Victoria died. He supported your reforms when the rest of the old guard wanted to resist. I thought maybe you were turning a blind eye, letting him operate because it served some larger purpose I didn't understand. When I realized you were genuinely ignorant, it was too late. He'd already moved against Gabriel. Damien set down the files. You're asking me to believe that Castellan, who's been on this council for 150 years, who supported my policies and defended my rule, is the traitor. And you, who've been openly critical of my leadership and advocating for a return to authoritarian governance, are the loyal one trying to save my son. I'm asking you to look at the evidence and draw your own conclusions. I may disagree with your methods, Damien, but I've never questioned your right to rule or your love for your son. My criticisms have been political, not personal. Castellan's loyalty has been strategic. He's been positioning himself to step in when you inevitably fall. The tablet on Kane's desk chimed. Drake had been reviewing the encrypted files, cross-referencing them with castle logs. His expression when he looked up was grim. Sire, this checks out. Every meeting, every transaction, it all links back to Castellan. And there's more. He's been accessing Gabriel's medical records, tracking his development, documenting his abilities. There's a file here titled Hybrid Vulnerabilities that reads like an assassination manual. Damien felt something cold settle in his gut. If Castellan was the traitor, then the conspiracy went deeper than simple power politics. Someone was studying Gabriel not to protect him, but to exploit his weaknesses. And that someone had been operating under Damien's nose for over a year. Where is Castellan now? Drake checked his communication feed. No one's seen him since the council meeting this afternoon. His quarters are empty. Locator beacon shows him off grounds. Find him. I want him brought in alive. If he resists, use whatever force necessary, but I need him conscious enough to answer questions. Drake moved to execute the order. Damien turned back to Kane, who sat with the calm of someone vindicated by evidence. If you're lying, if this is misdirection, then execute me yourself. I'll accept the consequence. But I'm not lying, and the sooner you accept that, the sooner we can stop the real threat. Damien studied the general for a long moment, then reached out and unlocked the restraints. Kane rubbed his wrists, but made no other movement, waiting for his king's decision. You're reinstated, temporarily. Help Drake track Castellan. If we find evidence you've misled me, the execution you offered will be carried out immediately. Kane stood, snapping to attention with the precision of 2 centuries military service. Understood, sire. For what it's worth, I hope I'm wrong. I hope this all turns out to be paranoid delusion and Castellan has a perfectly reasonable explanation. But in 400 years, have you ever seen me paranoid? He hadn't. Kane was many things: traditional, inflexible, occasionally dogmatic, but never paranoid. If he'd spent 6 months building a case, he believed the threat was real. Damien left Kane coordinating with Drake and returned to the medical wing, where Sarah still sat vigil beside Gabriel's bed. She dozed off in the chair, head tilted at an angle that would give her a terrible neck ache. Gabriel slept peacefully, one hand extended toward her, even in unconsciousness. Damien settled into a chair against the opposite wall, watching them both. His son and the woman who'd appeared like an answer to a question he hadn't known to ask. Gabriel had called her family, had said she was the key. Trust no one except family, his strange episode had warned. What if Victoria had known? What if in those final moments she'd seen some version of the future and made arrangements binding protections and contingencies into the very fabric of Gabriel's existence? The crest that should have burned Sarah, but didn't. Gabriel's dreams about someone who matched her description. The timing of her appearance, exactly when Gabriel needed rescuing. Too many coincidences. Too much convergence around a woman who claimed to be nothing more than a former EMT working administrative shifts to make rent. But Sarah Mitchell was Grace's daughter, which made her Victoria's niece, which made her Gabriel's family by blood, if not by law. And if there was one thing Damien had learned in 400 years, it was that blood had a way of asserting itself regardless of circumstance. He pulled out his phone, composing a message to his most trusted research specialist. 3 words: investigate Sarah Mitchell. Then he added parameters. Employment history, financial records, medical files, every digital footprint she'd left in 32 years of existence. If there were secrets buried in her past, he needed to find them before they found him. The phone buzzed with a response. Already working. Preliminary sweep shows anomalies. Full report by dawn. Anomalies. Damien almost smiled. Of course there were anomalies. Nothing about this situation made sense without it. He pocketed the phone and let his head fall back against the wall. Exhaustion pulling at consciousness he usually kept tightly controlled. 400 years of discipline suggested he should stay alert, maintain vigilance, guard against threats that might materialize while his attention wavered. But Sarah slept 3 feet away, vulnerable and trusting despite every reason to flee. And Gabriel breathed peacefully for the first time in hours, hand reaching toward family he'd found through means that defied explanation. Sometimes Damien thought you had to trust the inexplicable. Sometimes you had to believe that the universe occasionally bent in your favor, even when logic suggested otherwise. He closed his eyes, letting himself drift in the space between waking and sleep, and tried to remember the last time he'd felt something other than duty or grief. Tried to remember what hope tasted like before Victoria died and took all the light with her. Somewhere in the castle, hunters and traders plotted. Somewhere beyond the dimensional roads, enemies gathered strength. But here in this sterile room with its beeping monitors and antiseptic smell, something fragile and new took root. A connection, a possibility. the first green shoot of something that might eventually bloom if he could keep everyone alive long enough to see it grow. Damien opened his eyes one last time before letting sleep claim him. Sarah shifted in her chair, murmuring something inaudible. Gabriel's fingers twitched toward her. And in the portrait that hung in Damien's distant study oil paint, captured Victoria's smile with a permanence that mocked mortality, and whispered, "I told you so." Sarah woke to silence so complete, it felt like a physical presence pressing against her eardrums. The chair had molded itself to her spine during the night, leaving vertebrae that protested every micro-movement. Gray light filtered through windows she didn't remember existing, illuminating a room that belonged in a science fiction film rather than lived experience. Medical equipment hummed at frequencies just below conscious hearing. Gabriel still slept, his hand now curled against his own chest, where hers had been before exhaustion forced her to shift positions. The door opened without sound. A woman entered carrying a tray that smelled of coffee, strong enough to resurrect the dead eggs prepared in ways Sarah's childhood budget had never allowed, and fruit cut into geometric precision. She set it on the rolling table without speaking, bowed her head in a gesture Sarah couldn't interpret, and departed as silently as she'd arrived. Sarah stared at the food. Her stomach growled despite the surrealism of accepting breakfast. From vampires in a castle that shouldn't exist. The coffee tasted exactly right. Dark roast, no cream, 2 sugars she hadn't requested, but somehow they'd known. She drank it standing at the window, watching mist curl through valleys that stretched farther than Seattle's geography should permit. "Miss Mitchell." Drake's voice came from the doorway, professional courtesy masking whatever he actually thought about the human who'd infiltrated their world. "His Majesty requests your presence. I'll escort you to breakfast." The castle revealed itself in morning light as something caught between Era's stone quarters, fitted with LED strips that mimicked torchlight tapestries depicting battles Sarah couldn't identify, hanging beside abstract art that wouldn't look out of place in a modern gallery. They passed vampires going about morning routines, if vampires had morning routines, who stopped to stare with varying degrees of curiosity and hostility. Drake's presence kept them at a distance, but Sarah felt the weight of their attention like insects crawling across her skin. The dining room occupied a circular tower, with windows on all sides flooding the space with light that seemed brighter than natural sun. Damien sat at a table sized for intimate conversations rather than formal meals, reading something on a tablet that he set aside when she entered. He'd changed clothes since last night, the midnight blue suit replaced by charcoal gray that made his ice blue eyes more pronounced. "You slept in a chair." Not a question observation delivered with the faint disapproval of someone who understood ergonomics. "That was unnecessary. We have guest quarters." Sarah claimed the seat across from him, accepting the coffee a server materialized to pour. "I told Gabriel I'd stay. Seemed important to keep my word." "It was. He woke an hour ago asking for you. When I explained you needed rest, he made me promise you'd be back before he finished breakfast. You have approximately, say..." Damien checked his watch, an antique piece that probably cost more than her annual salary, 23 minutes. The food appeared as though summoned by thought rather than request. Eggs Benedict with hollandaise that belonged in a Michelin-starred kitchen, bacon thick cut, and maple-glazed potatoes roasted with herbs Sarah couldn't identify. She ate because her body demanded fuel, but tasted nothing too aware of Damien watching her, with the kind of attention that suggested he was cataloging every gesture for later analysis. "You have questions." He sipped coffee. He didn't need a remnant of humanity preserved through centuries of habit. "Ask them. Anything you want to know about what you've walked into. What happened to your family, what happens next. I'll answer with as much truth as I can offer." Sarah set down her fork. "Start with Victoria. You said she died giving birth. Walk me through those last weeks. I need to understand what my mother did and why." Damien's expression shifted, grief surfacing before discipline could suppress it. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory relived too many times. "Victoria discovered she was pregnant 3 weeks before Grace poisoned her. We'd been planning to turn her. The process of becoming vampire requires stopping. The heart introducing our venom, letting it rewrite cellular structure. It's agonizing and not without risk, but Victoria wanted immortality. Wanted to raise Gabriel alongside me, rather than watch from the sidelines while age took her and left us behind." He paused, collecting words that had lived in his mind for a decade but rarely escaped into speech. Grace found out about the pregnancy before we did. She'd been monitoring Victoria, I realize now, tracking her movements, listening to phone calls, building a case that her sister was being controlled by vampire influence. When the pregnancy test came back positive, Grace panicked. She believed correctly from a certain perspective that a half-vampire child was an abomination, something that shouldn't exist. Sarah's coffee had gone cold. She didn't reach for it. Grace had access to family archives that detailed vampire physiology weaknesses, methods of execution. Somewhere in those texts, she found references to enchanted silver, a weapon supposedly lost to history. I still don't know where she acquired it. The formula was burned during the Vampire Hunter Treaty of 1823. Every written copy destroyed every smith who knew the process executed. But Grace got her hands on it somehow. Damien stood crossing to the window, speaking to the forest rather than Sarah. She brewed it into tea, chamomile, Victoria's favorite. Delivered it herself one afternoon when I was handling council business. Sat with her sister, watched her drink. It probably told herself she was saving Victoria from a monster. The silver bonded with the pregnancy hormones, created a compound that attacked Victoria's immune system while simultaneously preventing the fetus from developing properly. By the time Victoria started showing symptoms, fever, nausea, cellular degradation, it was too late to reverse. Why didn't you turn her and stop the process? Because turning someone who's pregnant kills the child instantly. The venom rewrites everything, recognizes the fetus as foreign material, and purges it. We tried experimental treatments, blood transfusions, drugs that don't exist in human hospitals. Nothing worked. The only option was to let the pregnancy continue and hope Victoria's body could filter enough silver to keep Gabriel viable. He turned back to face her, and Sarah saw something in his expression she hadn't expected. Not anger at Grace, but sorrow that encompassed everyone caught in the tragedy's gravitational pull. Victoria lasted 8 months. Gabriel was born underweight, struggling to breathe but alive. Victoria held him for 6 minutes, long enough to name him, to make me promise I'd raise him with love, rather than duty, to ask me to forgive Grace, because her sister had acted out of love, even if that love was misdirected. His voice cracked on the last word, barely perceptible, but there. Then her heart stopped, and I became a single father to the only half-vampire hybrid in existence. Sarah found her voice after a silence that stretched too long. Grace knew what she'd done. That's why she ran. She figured it out in the 7th month. Showed up at the castle gates, demanded to see. Victoria tried to confess and beg forgiveness. Victoria refused to see her. Made me promise again, always promises with Victoria, that I wouldn't harm Grace, wouldn't hunt her, would let her live with the consequences. So I did. I set Grace up with money documents, a new identity. Watched from a distance as she started over in Portland. Married your father had you. When the hunters found her 19 years later, I tried to intervene. Arrived too late. Did she have the formula? When she died, Damien's jaw tightened. The hunters thought so. They tortured her for 3 hours before staging the accident. Whatever she knew, she took to her grave rather than give it up. I searched her apartment, her storage unit, every place she'd lived in the previous decade. Found nothing. Assumed the formula died with her and the threat ended. Until last night. Until last night, when someone used freshly forged enchanted silver on my son. Which means either Grace lied about destroying her copy, or someone else has access to sources we thought extinct. A soft chime interrupted them. Damien glanced at his tablet, expression shifting from grief to sharp focus in the span of a breath. The research specialist I mentioned last night, she's found something. He pulled up files on the tablet, turning it so Sarah could see. Her own face stared back from a dozen documents: driver's license, employment records, medical history. Layers of her life exposed and analyzed by strangers while she slept. Your mother was careful, Damien said, scrolling through data. Changed your surname 6 times before you turned 18. Moved you across state lines frequently enough to avoid pattern recognition. Homeschooled you until high school, minimizing your paper trail. You didn't exist in any meaningful database until you turned 16 and got your first legal ID. I know all this. Dad explained after Mom died that we had to be careful, that people might be looking for us. I thought he was paranoid. He was protecting you, but here's what's interesting. Damien expanded a document that looked like a genetic analysis. 3 months ago, you donated blood at a Swedish medical center drive. Standard procedure happens dozens of times daily, except your blood triggered flags in their screening process. Unusual protein markers, cellular anomalies that didn't match any known condition. The technician flagged it for further study, sent samples to a research lab. Sarah's stomach dropped. What kind of anomalies? The kind that suggest repeated exposure to vampire biology. When humans spend significant time around vampires, their blood chemistry changes. Subtle shifts in antibody production, minor alterations to cellular metabolism. Nothing dangerous, but distinctive enough that trained observers can identify it. Your blood showed these markers despite you claiming no knowledge of vampire existence until last night. That's impossible. I've never... Which means either you're lying about your history or someone exposed you to vampires before you were old enough to remember. Damien met her eyes. Grace ran from hunters, but also from vampire society. What if she spent your early childhood in contact with our world? What if the first 5 years of your life included exposure you don't consciously recall? Sarah's mind raced backward, grasping for memories that existed only as impressions. Her mother singing in a language that wasn't English. Dreams of buildings that looked like castles. A woman with brown eyes who smiled at her with Victoria's warmth, though Sarah had never seen Victoria's face until last night's portrait. There's more. Damien pulled up another file, this one showing brain scans. The research lab ran neural imaging as part of their workup. Found unusual activity in your hippocampus and amygdala, the regions responsible for memory formation and emotional processing. The patterns suggest suppressed memories possibly induced through psychological intervention or psychic manipulation. Someone didn't want you to remember your early childhood. Grace did this. My own mother blocked my memories. Or someone did it to protect you. If you retain memories of vampire exposure, hunters could extract that information through interrogation. Easier to erase the danger than trust a child to keep secrets. Sarah stood abruptly, chair scraping against stone. The room felt too small, air too thick. So what am I? A sleeper agent, someone's pawn. You're telling me my entire life is built on manufactured ignorance. I'm telling you that you're the niece of a woman I loved, daughter of a woman who tried to save her sister through terrible means, and possibly the key to understanding a conspiracy that threatens everyone in this castle. Damien's voice remained level, infuriatingly calm. Whatever was done to you, whoever arranged it, you're here now. You saved Gabriel. That's the only fact that currently matters. The door opened. Gabriel stood in the threshold, still wearing medical scrubs too large for his frame, one hand gripping the doorframe for support. His amber eyes found Sarah, immediately relief flooding his features. You came back. Dad said you would, but I wasn't sure if... His voice caught residual fear from abandonment issues Sarah recognized from her EMT days. Kids who'd lost parents never quite trusted promises of return. She crossed to him, instinctively kneeling so they were eye level. I promised I'd be here before you finished breakfast. I keep my promises. Gabriel studied her face with the kind of intensity that suggested he was looking for something specific and some marker of authenticity that would confirm she was real rather than dream. Finally satisfied, he nodded. Good, because I need to show you something. In the library, something Mom left that I think is meant for you. Sarah glanced at Damien, who'd risen from his seat, already moving toward them. What kind of something? Her journal. The real one, not the official records. She kept it hidden in the library's restricted section. I found it last year but couldn't understand parts of it. But now you're here and maybe... He looked between them, certainty replacing hesitation. Maybe it will make sense. The library existed 3 floors below the main castle, carved into mountain bedrock, with the same precision that suggested vampire engineering merged with something older. Books lined walls that stretched up 30 feet, accessible via spiral staircases and floating platforms that moved through space without visible support. The air smelled of paper and leather and time, that particular perfume libraries develop when knowledge accumulates long enough to develop sentience. Gabriel led them to a section marked with symbols Sarah couldn't read, reaching behind a thick volume on vampire political theory to trigger some hidden mechanism. A panel slid aside, revealing a compartment that held a single leather-bound journal. Mom told me where to find this, in my dreams. Gabriel pulled it out with reverence, handling it like sacred text. She said when the time came when Sarah appeared, I should show her, that you'd understand things Dad couldn't. Damien's expression suggested he wanted to object to being excluded from Victoria's confidence, but he remained silent as Gabriel opened the journal and the page marked with a ribbon. Victoria's handwriting filled the paper elegant script that flowed with the confidence of someone writing for specific eyes rather than general audience. Sarah read words that seemed to reach across a decade of death. If you're reading this, Gabriel has found you. My Sarah, Grace's daughter, the girl I met when she was 3 years old before everything fell apart, before my sister tried to save me and destroyed us both. I need you to understand something. Grace never told you something Damien doesn't know, because I couldn't explain it without revealing truths that would have endangered everyone. The formula for enchanted silver wasn't something Grace found in family archives. It was something I gave her. Sarah's hands began to shake. Damien moved closer, reading over her shoulder, his stillness more ominous than any reaction. I was dying before Grace ever poisoned me. The pregnancy triggered a genetic condition that exists in the Mitchell bloodline, passed through women dormant until activated by specific circumstances. My grandmother died of it, my great-grandmother. Going back 6 generations, every woman who tried to carry a hybrid child to term. Grace didn't know I kept it from her because I knew she'd try to stop me from getting pregnant in the first place. When I realized I was dying, I made a choice. I could let the disease kill me and the baby, or I could use the silver to stabilize the pregnancy while sacrificing my own life. The formula I gave Grace was incomplete, a version that would slow the deterioration rather than cure it. I told her it was a weapon against Damien, played on her fears, manipulated her into administering it, because she'd never have agreed if she knew the truth. Grace didn't kill me. I killed myself using her love as the weapon. And I've lived with that guilt in whatever comes after death, knowing my sister spent 19 years believing she murdered me, running from hunters and vampire society because of a lie I constructed. The journal entry continued across several pages detailing Victoria's calculations, her decision to sacrifice herself to give Gabriel a chance at life, her arrangements to protect both Grace and Sarah from the fallout. Near the end, the handwriting became shakier. Written in what must have been Victoria's final hours, Sarah. If you're reading this, it means the timeline I foresaw has manifested. Gabriel needs you, not because of bloodline or family obligation, but because you carry something in your genetic code that can stabilize his hybrid nature. When I held you as a toddler, I could feel the same resonance I felt with Grace, but stronger. You're the bridge between human and vampire biology in ways even you don't understand yet. The formula for true enchanted silver is encoded in a lullaby my mother sang to me, that I sang to Grace, that Grace sang to you. Your suppressed memories contain the key. When the time comes when Gabriel's life depends on it, the song will surface. Trust the melody, trust yourself, and please, please forgive my sister for believing a lie I needed her to believe. With love that transcends death, Victoria. Sarah closed the journal with trembling hands. The implications cascaded through her mind, rearranging everything she'd understood about her family. Her mother's guilt, the trajectory of her own existence. Grace hadn't killed Victoria. Victoria had orchestrated her own death and let Grace carry the blame. And somehow, impossible as it seemed, Victoria had known about Sarah, had met her, had planned for this moment before dying. The lullaby, Gabriel's voice broke the silence. You know it, don't you? The one that goes. He hummed a melody that triggered something deep in Sarah's memory, neurons firing in patterns that felt like archaeology excavating what had been deliberately buried. The words came unbidden, surfacing in a language Sarah didn't consciously speak, but her mouth shaped with native fluency, silver blessed in lunar light, 3 parts ash to 1 part night, bound by thorn from ancient tree, sealed by blood of family. More verses followed, technical instructions disguised as nursery rhyme, the complete formula for enchanted silver encoded in rhythms designed to bypass conscious memory and embed directly into childhood neural pathways. Sarah sang it through to the end, her voice cracking on the final line, tears streaming down her face as memories surfaced. Victoria holding her Grace, watching with something between love and terror, a castle that looked exactly like the one she stood in now. Damien had gone utterly still. You remember? I remember. The words felt like confession, like wound opening. Grace brought me here, before everything happened, before the pregnancy, before the poisoning. I was 3 years old. Victoria held me and said I was special, that I'd grow up to help Gabriel when he needed me most. Then something happened, an argument, Grace grabbing me, running. The memories were erased, but the song remained because it was embedded too deep to remove. Drake's voice came from the library entrance, urgent and controlled. Sire, we've located Castellan. He's at an abandoned warehouse on Pier 19. Infrared shows multiple heat signatures inside at least 20 individuals, human and vampire signatures mixed. He's not alone, and they appear to be manufacturing something. Damien's expression hardened into the mask Sarah recognized from last night, the king replacing the grieving widower. Manufacturing enchanted silver. He has the formula. Or he has someone who knows it. Drake's gaze flickered to Sarah. The question is how he obtained it, unless he's been monitoring Sarah for months, waiting for her memories to surface. Damien pulled out his phone, already coordinating. How many of our people can we mobilize in the next hour? 15 on site, another 20 within 2 hours. But sire, if this is a trap, it's absolutely a trap. He wants me to come, personally wants to force confrontation away from the castle where his council allies can't interfere, which is exactly why we're going to give him what he wants. Damien turned to Sarah. You're staying here, under guard. Whatever Castellan is planning, it involves you and Gabriel. Separating you is the objective. Sarah shook her head. If he's making enchanted silver, he needs to test it, needs to verify the formula works before manufacturing at scale. And the only way to test it is against vampire physiology. She met his eyes. You walk in there, you're the test subject. He's going to use you to prove the weapon works, then kill you in front of witnesses to demonstrate vampire kings aren't invincible. Then what do you suggest? Use me as bait. Let him think I'm vulnerable, that I've been retrieved from the city for questioning. He'll come for me here where you control the terrain rather than us walking into his prepared battleground. Gabriel grabbed her arm. No, I just found you. You can't. I'm not going anywhere. Sarah knelt beside him again, hands on his shoulders. But sometimes the safest place is the eye of the storm. Your father built this castle to withstand sieges. Pier 19 is open ground with no defenses. Tactically forcing Castellan to come to us rather than us going to him is the smarter play. Damien studied her with new assessment, seeing past civilian to strategist. You've thought about this, about how to survive when predators hunt you. Grace taught me. Hide in plain sight, make them come to you, use their assumptions against them. I've been running my entire life without understanding why. Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting. Drake's phone buzzed with incoming data. His expression shifted from professional concern to alarm. Sire, we have a problem. Thermal imaging shows the warehouse heat signatures moving. Multiple vehicles departing in convoy formation heading toward the dimensional roads. They're coming here. How long? 40 minutes if they use the direct routes, less if they know the shortcuts. Damien's hand found Sarah's elbow grip, gentle but inexorable. Drake, full castle lockdown. All civilians to safe rooms, combat teams to defensive positions. Council members confined to quarters until we've neutralized the threat. He pulled Sarah toward the exit. You wanted to fight. You're about to get your wish. The castle transformed around them, centuries-old stone, revealing modern warfare infrastructure. Blast doors sealed corridors. Automated weapon systems emerged from hidden panels. Vampires moved with military precision, donning tactical gear that looked like something from science fiction weapons that hummed with energy Sarah couldn't identify. Within 10 minutes, the castle had become a fortress preparing for siege. Damien installed Sarah and Gabriel in what he called the Secure Heart, a reinforced chamber 3 levels below ground, surrounded by walls thick enough to withstand explosives, warded with protections that made Sarah's teeth ache just standing inside them. Drake assigned 6 guards who looked like they could bench press cars, positioning them with overlapping fields of fire. Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone except me or Drake. If you hear fighting, if the power fails, if anything happens, there's an emergency tunnel behind that bookshelf. Follow it 3 miles northeast. It surfaces in a state park where you can signal for help. Sarah caught his wrist before he could turn away. You're going to face him, Castellan. You're going to make him come through you to get to us. That's what kings do, protect their own. That's what martyrs do, get themselves killed proving points. She tightened her grip. Gabriel needs his father. Don't throw your life away because you feel guilty about Victoria. Something flickered in Damien's eyes, old pain rising before discipline suppressed it. 400 years I've walked this earth, watched empires rise and fall, loved people who aged and died while I remained. I'm tired, Sarah. So tired of politics and violence and the weight of responsibility. But Gabriel is everything I have left that matters. If dying keeps him safe, it's a trade I'll make without hesitation. Then live for the same reason. Because he needs you here, not as a memory he'll spend the next 400 years mourning. Damien's hand covered hers, cold fingers against her warmth. If I don't come back, you're coming back. I didn't survive my entire childhood running from shadows just to watch you walk into them voluntarily. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Then he was gone, the reinforced door sealing behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. Gabriel sat on a bench against the wall, knees drawn to his chest, watching Sarah with eyes too old for his face. He's going to die. I can feel it. The future branches, and in most of them, Dad doesn't survive the next hour. Sarah crossed to him, sinking onto the bench. Most isn't all. Which branch are we in? I don't know yet. The futures keep shifting based on choices people make. But his voice dropped to whisper. Mom's here. I can feel her. She's trying to tell me something, but I can't hear clearly enough. It's like listening to someone underwater. What do you think she's trying to say, Mom? Gabriel closed his eyes, concentration etching lines across his forehead. When he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics that weren't quite his own. Victoria's cadence bleeding through. The silver is a lie. Castellan doesn't have the real formula. He has a version incomplete, dangerous to everyone who touches it. The real weapon isn't metal, it's belief, trust. The bonds we break when we doubt each other. His eyes snapped open, amber irises blazing gold. Sarah, we have to stop them. Not the fighting the lie. Castellan wants Dad to believe his own people betrayed him, wants to fracture the council beyond repair. If Dad kills council members who aren't actually traitors, the real conspiracy wins. Alarms shrieked through the castle at a sound designed to penetrate vampire hearing at frequencies that made humans nauseous. Sarah's stomach lurched. Gabriel grabbed her hand, squeezing hard enough to bruise. They're inside the walls. The explosion ripped through the castle's north tower. At 3:47 p.m., a percussion wave that rattled centuries-old stone and sent a plume of smoke visible for miles. Damien felt it in his bones, the violation of his sanctuary, and his first thought wasn't tactical assessment, but singular terror. Gabriel. Drake's voice crackled through the commune. North Tower breach confirmed. Multiple hostiles entering through the gap. Thermal shows 37 signatures, mixed human and vampire. Castellan is leading the advance personally. Damien sprinted through corridors that had become a war zone, vampires engaging intruders, with the kind of violence that came from defending home rather than following orders. He passed bodies, too many both sides, bleeding out on floors that had witnessed 400 years of relative peace. The scent of silver hung in the air, acrid and wrong, making his throat constrict. The throne room had become command center monitors, displaying feeds from security cameras across the castle. Vivian stood coordinating defensive positions, her silver hair pulled back in a severe knot, violet eyes tracking threats with the precision of someone who'd survived 2 centuries by reading battlefields correctly. Castellan is pushing for the lower levels, she reported without preamble. He's not trying to hold ground, just drive through to wherever you've hidden the air. Sire, this is suicide tactics. He's sacrificing his own forces to create a path. Then we collapse the path behind him. Seal the blast doors at levels 2 and 3. Trap him between floors where we can... Majesty. Kane emerged from a side entrance, the armor scored with burns, face grim. Castellan has an amplification device, something that's boosting the silver's potency. Our people are dropping from exposure that should only cause minor burns. We need to shut down whatever he's powering before we lose half the castle guard. Damien pulled up schematics on the central screen. Where's the power source? Engineering level, sub-basement 4. He planted it before the attack, probably during the chaos after Gabriel's rescue. Time charge remote activation. Take a team, disable it. I'm going after Castellan. Kane hesitated, something shifting in his expression. Damien, I know we've had our differences, but I've served this throne for 200 years. I won't let it fall because we were too proud to trust each other. Then prove yourself. Shut down that device. Kane snapped a salute and vanished into the smoke. Damien turned to Vivian. How long until they reach the secure heart? 10 minutes? Maybe 8 if they burn through our defensive lines faster than projected. Get me there in 5. The dimensional roads inside the castle were emergency systems, spatial folds that allowed defenders to move between critical locations without traversing normal space. Damien stepped through a shimmering portal and emerged 3 levels down directly into a firefight. Castellan stood at the center of his forces, directing them with the calm of someone orchestrating a symphony rather than a slaughter. He'd aged since Damien had last seen him at close range. Stress-adding lines, even vampires couldn't fully suppress, but his eyes burned with the conviction of someone who believed absolutely in the righteousness of his cause. Damien, I was wondering when you'd stop hiding behind subordinates and face me yourself. Damien drew the blade he carried for ceremonial purposes that had become suddenly practical. Silver-edged steel that had tasted blood in wars that predated the United States. You've committed treason, attacked your own people, killed vampires you swore to protect. For what power ideology? For survival. Castellan gestured to the carnage around them. You've made us weak. Coddling humans, making treaties with hunters, allowing half-breed abominations to carry the royal bloodline. Our species is dying because you're too sentimental to make hard choices. Gabriel is my son, not an abomination. Gabriel is a mistake that will doom us all if he inherits the throne. His human blood makes him vulnerable to every weapon in the hunter arsenal. His existence proves that vampires can breed with cattle, which undermines the fundamental separation that keeps us apex predators, rather than evolutionary dead ends. Damien felt ancient fury rising, the kind that had made him dangerous before he'd learned to temper violence with wisdom. You want the old ways, fine. I challenge you. Single combat. Winner takes the throne, loser gets nothing but a quick death. Castellan smiled, a predator's expression that held no warmth. I was hoping you'd say that. The circle formed instinctively, both sides pulling back to create space. This was vampire law, older than written language. Conflicts resolved through personal combat when political solutions failed. The outcome would bind both factions regardless of individual sympathies. They circled each other, centuries of accumulated skill, reading stance and micro-movements. Castellan struck first blade, whistling through air, where Damien's throat had been a microsecond earlier. Damien countered, low, forcing Castellan to leap, creating an opening that Damien exploited with a strike that drew first blood. Silver burned where it touched Castellan's ribs. He hissed, but didn't retreat, pressing forward with combinations that spoke of military training and actual combat experience. Damien defended, letting muscle memory handle the mechanics while his mind worked the larger problem. This was theater. Castellan wanted this fight. Public wanted witnesses to see the old king fall to someone who represented the values they'd abandoned. Win or lose, the council would fracture. Vampires who'd been loyal to Damien out of respect would question whether that loyalty was justified. The castle would become a powder keg, regardless of who survived the next 5 minutes, unless Damien changed the narrative. He let Castellan land a hit blade, scoring across his shoulder deep enough to send blood down his arm. The watching vampires gasped, Castellan's supporters cheered, and Damien used the moment to pivot inside Castellan's guard, getting close enough that their faces were inches apart. You're right about one thing, Damien said quietly for Castellan's ears alone. I have been weak, letting grief cloud judgment, letting fear of loss prevent me from trusting my own people. But you're wrong about Gabriel. He's not our weakness. He's proof we can evolve beyond what we were, become something that doesn't require constant war to justify existence. He shoved Castellan back, not with supernatural strength, but with the force of someone who'd made a decision. I yield the duel. You win. Take the throne, and with it take responsibility for what comes next. Silence crashed through the corridor. Castellan froze, blade raised for a killing stroke he'd expected to deliver, confronted instead with surrender he hadn't anticipated. You're not serious. Completely serious. You want to lead. Make the hard choices. Send vampires to Dio, enforcing policies they don't believe in. Watch the young ones leave for other territories because fear stopped being an effective governance model sometime around the fall of the Roman Empire. Discover that being king is less about power and more about grinding yourself down, trying to balance impossible demands from people who will never be satisfied. Damien dropped his blade, the clang of steel on stone deafening in the quiet. I'm tired, Castellan. Tired of fighting, tired of politics, tired of watching people I care about die because I can't protect them all. You think you can do better? Prove it. I'll step aside, voluntarily. No coup required. Castellan's expression cycled through confusion, suspicion, calculation. This is a trick. This is exhaustion. 400 years of it. Damien turned to address everyone watching. Hear me? I, Damien Sinclair, abdicate the throne effective immediately. Castellan has won by virtue of my surrender. The crown passes to him, along with all responsibilities, all burdens, all impossible choices that come with ruling people who are too stubborn to admit they need leading. He started walking toward the secure heart, each step feeling lighter than the last. Behind him, chaos erupted, vampires shouting questions, Castellan trying to restore order, the whole carefully constructed hierarchy collapsing into disorder. Drake appeared at his side, materializing from shadows. Sire, what are you doing? Choosing my son over politics. Should have done it years ago. But the castle will survive without me. They always do. Kings are replaceable, fathers aren't. The secure heart's door responded to Damien's biometrics, massive locks, disengaging with hydraulic precision. He stepped through, expecting to find Sarah and Gabriel huddled in protected fear. Instead, found them standing in the center of the room, Gabriel's eyes blazing full gold, the air around him vibrating with power that made reality shimmer. Dad! Gabriel's voice carried that strange harmonic overlay, Victoria's presence layered beneath. Castellan's formula is fake. The silver he's using is poisoned. It kills vampires and humans both. Everyone who touches it is dying. You have to stop them from manufacturing more. Sarah stood beside Gabriel, one hand on his shoulder, grounding him. We figured it out. The lullaby Victoria taught me, it's not just the formula, it's also the antidote. The real enchanted silver can be neutralized if you know the counter melody. But what Castellan has is corrupted, incomplete. It's going to kill his own people. Damien crossed to Gabriel, kneeling so they were eye level. Son, I need you to do something very difficult. Can you use your power to broadcast a message to every vampire in the castle simultaneously? Gabriel nodded, concentration etching lines across his young face. What message? That the war is over, that I've abdicated, that anyone who wants to leave can do so without consequence, and that the silver Castellan is using will kill them if they don't get medical treatment immediately. Power surged Gabriel's consciousness, expanding outward in waves Damien could feel rippling through the castle's bones. When Gabriel spoke, his voice echoed in the minds of every vampire within a mile radius. The king has abdicated. Castellan won. But the silver is poison to everyone. Stop fighting, seek medical aid before it's too late. The effect was immediate. Through security feeds, Damien watched combat cease, vampires on both sides staggering as the message penetrated their awareness. Castellan's forces began dropping silver burns, spreading faster than normal healing could compensate. Within 90 seconds, half of them were unconscious. Castellan himself appeared on the monitor, outside the secure heart, face twisted with rage and something else, fear, as he realized the weapon he trusted was killing his own army. He pounded on the door, silver-coated fists, leaving burns on reinforced steel. Open this door, face me like the king you claim to be. Damien opened it. Castellan lunged, blade raised, murder in his eyes. Gabriel's power lashed out, telekinetic force that lifted Castellan off his feet and slammed him against the corridor wall hard enough to crack stone. The blade clattered to the floor. You hurt my family. Gabriel's voice, still layered with Victoria's harmonics, carried the absolute certainty of someone pronouncing judgment. You tried to kill my father. You poisoned your own people. For what power you don't understand. A throne you are not capable of holding. Castellan struggled against the invisible grip veins standing out on his neck. The boy speaks. How terrifying. I'm sure that will comfort you when human governments discover your existence and exterminate you like the parasites you are. Sarah stepped forward, pulling something from her pocket, the silver coin the hunter had left at her diner. You wanted the formula so badly. Here, take it. She tossed it at Castellan's feet. The moment it touched his skin, smoke rose burns spreading with unnatural speed. Castellan screamed a sound that echoed through corridors and made every vampire in hearing range flinch. "That's real enchanted silver," Sarah said quietly. "The kind Victoria encoded in the lullaby. The kind that recognizes intent. It burns those who would use it for murder, but doesn't harm those who seek protection. Your corrupted version kills indiscriminately because you built it wrong. You tried to weaponize something that was designed to be a shield." Gabriel released his telekinetic hold. Castellan collapsed convulsing as the silver's purifying properties fought the corruption in his system. Within seconds, he went still, eyes vacant, life departing more quickly than vampire physiology should permit. Damien felt nothing looking at the body. No triumph, no grief, just exhaustion deeper than bone. He'd spent 400 years trying to be better than his predecessors, trying to rule with wisdom rather than fear. And it had led here to bodies in his halls and a traitor dead at his feet. Sarah's hand found his arm. "You did the right thing, abdicating, choosing Gabriel. I chose exhaustion. There's a difference, a behemoth. No, you chose what mattered over what was expected. That's courage, not weakness." Gabriel wrapped his arms around Damien's waist, small body trembling with residual power and fear and relief. "You're not leaving, are you? You said you abdicated, but that doesn't mean you're going away, right?" Damien held his son, burying his face in the dark hair that smelled of hospital antiseptic and childhood shampoo. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together. The three of us." Sarah met his eyes over Gabriel's head, question implicit. Damien nodded, answer given without words. Whatever happened next, they'd face it as something close to family. Drake appeared with a medical team already triaging the wounded. "Sire, apologies, Damien, we've secured the castle. Castellan's remaining forces have surrendered. Kane disabled the amplification device. Casualties are significant. We lost 43 vampires, mostly younger ones, who took concentrated silver exposure. Another 60 are in critical condition. Get them treatment. Use whatever resources necessary. And Drake?" Damien stood, Gabriel still clinging to him. "Stop calling me sire. I meant what I said. I'm done being king. The council will need to convene, determine succession. You can't just walk away from 400 years of infrastructure. Watch me." The council convened an emergency session 6 hours later, gathered in a chamber that smelled of smoke and blood and centuries of accumulated gravitas. Damien stood before them, no longer king, but still commanding respect through sheer presence. Gabriel sat beside him, Sarah on his other side, forming a unit that the assembled vampires struggled to categorize. Vivienne spoke first, her voice cutting through murmured conversations. "Your abdication was dramatic, but legally questionable. Succession requires council approval. You can't simply hand the throne to Castellan posthumously." "I'm not suggesting we do. I'm suggesting the council govern collectively until Gabriel comes of age. Rotate leadership annually, prevent any single individual from accumulating the kind of power that corrupts. Establish checks, balances, accountability." Kane leaned forward. "You're proposing democracy for vampires. I'm proposing we evolve. Stop pretending we're still medieval warlords and acknowledge we're living in a century that demands adaptability. Our survival depends on blending with human society, not dominating it. That requires different governance than what served us in 1623. The debate raged for 3 hours. Proposals, counter-proposals, political maneuvering that made Damien grateful he'd stepped away from the throne. Finally, consensus emerged: temporary council governance with Vivienne as rotating chair. Gabriel recognized as heir, but not expected to rule until he reached majority at age 100, that Damien retained as advisor without executive authority. It was messy, complicated, and imperfect. Exactly what vampire society needed. Sarah found him afterward on a balcony overlooking the valley, watching stars emerge through gaps in smoke. "You're free. How does it feel?" "Terrifying. I've been king for 200 years. Don't know who I am without the crown." "You're Gabriel's father. That seems like enough identity for now." Damien turned to face her, seeing the woman who had stumbled into his world and somehow made it better through sheer, stubborn presence. "You're staying. I can feel you've decided. Gabriel needs me. She paused, searching for words. "I've spent my whole life running from shadows I didn't understand. Maybe it's time to stand in the light, even if it's vampire light in an underground castle." You'll have nightmares, trauma from what you witnessed today. Humans aren't built to process this level of violence. Good thing I know a 400-year-old vampire who's probably seen worse. Maybe we can have nightmares together, make them less lonely. Something in Damien's chest calcified by grief and duty cracked. Not breaking, but opening, letting in possibility he thought died with Victoria. I don't know how to do this. Be something other than king. Be just Damien. Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time. No expectations, no obligations. Just being. Gabriel appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Are you two gonna kiss? Or just stand there talking about feelings forever? Because I'm 10, and even I know this is the part where Gabriel, Damien's voice carried fatherly warning. What mom says you deserve to be happy, and Sarah makes you smile, which you haven't done in like my entire life. So Sarah laughed, the sound cutting through tension and grief and the weight of everything that had transpired. Your son is a romantic. Where did he learn that? Victoria, she believed in happy endings despite all evidence to the contrary. Smart woman. The smartest. Gabriel yawned, shuffling over to lean against Damien's side. Can we go home now? This castle smells like smoke and I want my own bed. Damien lifted his son, settling him against one hip despite Gabriel's protest that he was too old to be carried. Home sounds perfect. They walked through corridors being cleaned by vampires who'd survived past walls that would need repair and floors that would need scrubbing. The castle had endured worse revolutions, wars, attempted coups, and would endure this. Stone remembered everything and forgave nothing, but it stood regardless. Sarah's apartment in Seattle had burned hunters, making certain no evidence remained, so her possessions consisted of the clothes she'd worn 2 days ago and nothing else. Damien set her up in the guest wing rooms that overlooked the forest and received actual sunlight during the day. I'll need to find work, she said, examining the space that was bigger than her entire previous apartment. Can't exactly commute to Swedish medical from a castle in the mountains. The castle has a medical facility. Dr. Chen needs assistants who understand human physiology. The pay is sufficient. Is this charity? This is practicality. We have a hybrid heir whose medical needs are unprecedented. Having someone on staff who understands both species makes tactical sense. Sarah studied him, reading subtext. You want me here, not just for Gabriel, for you. I'm 400 years old. I don't want things. I accept realities and adjust accordingly. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. That's the most honest thing I've said in decades. She crossed to where he stood in the doorway, close enough that he could feel her warmth, her humanity, her stubborn refusal to be intimidated by ancient predators. Then here's reality. I'm staying because I choose to. Because Gabriel matters. Because you matter. Because for the first time since my mother died, I feel like I've found something worth staying for. Damien's hand lifted, hovering near her face, centuries of restraint, warring with the simple human desire for connection. I don't know how to do this, how to be someone who caught his hand, pressing it to her cheek. Then we learned together. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility. Gabriel's voice drifted from his bedroom down the hall. You're definitely going to kiss now, right? Because the dramatic tension is killing me and I'm trying to sleep. Damien closed his eyes, torn between exasperation and affection. Your son has no sense of timing. Your son has perfect timing. He just knows you need permission. Sarah's smile was soft understanding. So here it is. Permission to be human, even if you're not technically human anymore. Permission to want things. Permission to let yourself heal. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, tentative, a question rather than answer. And when they parted, Damien found himself smiling for the first time in 10 years, genuine emotion rather than political performance. We're going to figure this out, Sarah whispered. Together, Damien agreed. Gabriel's cheering echoed through the halls. 6 months later, the castle had found its rhythm. Council governance proved chaotic, but functional, forcing vampires to debate policy rather than enforce edicts. Gabriel attended both human school remotely and vampire tutoring, bridging worlds with increasing confidence. Sarah ran the medical facility with efficiency that made Dr. Chen grateful, treating everything from silver burns to existential crises with equal competence. And Damien discovered what it meant to be something other than king. He taught Gabriel to fight old combat forms passed down through centuries. He walked with Sarah through forests that stretched beyond dimensional boundaries, talking about everything and nothing. He attended council meetings as advisor, offering perspective without demanding authority. He slept without nightmares for the first time since Victoria's death. Life, he realized, continued, even for those who'd stopped believing it could. The morning Sarah found him in his study, he was reading reports on hunter activity across the Pacific Northwest. She leaned against the door frame, coffee in hand, watching him with fond exasperation. "You abdicated. You're not supposed to still be working." "I'm researching. There's a difference." "There's really not." She crossed to his desk, setting coffee beside his elbow. "Gabriel wants to show you something. In the garden. He's been practicing telekinesis, and apparently he can levitate himself now, which seems both impressive and deeply concerning from a parental safety perspective." Damien rose, pulling her close in a gesture that had become familiar over 6 months. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying. For believing this," he gestured vaguely at himself, "was worth the effort." "Always said yes." Sarah kissed him, comfortable and certain. "Now come watch your son defy gravity. I've already prepared the first aid kit just in case." They found Gabriel in the garden Victoria had planted, now tended by Sarah with the same care his late wife had shown. The boy floated 3 feet off the ground, concentration etched across his features, power crackling in the air around him. "Look, Dad, Sarah, I can..." He lost focus, gravity reasserting itself. Sarah caught him with reflexes honed by months of vampire proximity. Impressive, terrifying. "Let's maybe practice over soft surfaces until you've mastered the landing." Gabriel laughed, amber eyes bright with joy that had been absent for too long. "Mom says I'm doing great. She's here right now, watching." Damien felt the familiar pang grief that would never fully heal, but underneath it ran something new. Gratitude. Victoria had loved him enough to plan for his future even as she died, had arranged for Sarah and Gabriel to find each other, had given him permission through her final letter to heal. "Tell her thank you," Damien said quietly, "for everything." Gabriel's eyes went distant, listening to frequencies others couldn't hear. Then he smiled. "She says you're welcome, and she's happy you finally figured out what she knew all along, which is that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. And sometimes the best way to honor the past is by building a future." Sarah's hand found Damien's fingers lacing together. Above them, clouds parted to reveal stars that had witnessed 400 years of his existence and would witness 400 more. The castle stood firm stone, accepting its new purpose. And Damien Sinclair, former king, current father, allowed himself to believe in possibilities he'd thought died a decade ago. The story wasn't finished. Hunters still plotted. Political tensions simmered. Gabriel's hybrid nature raised questions without answers. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. And peace Damien had learned was worth fighting for.